You now devote your time to battling corruption. That's one big thing to take on.
Yeah, well, taking on Hollywood seemed small after a while, so I needed to take a really impossible task, which was to take on corruption, right, in the biggest sense.
Do you see any hope anywhere?
Yeah, so speaking purely rationally about it, it's hopeless, totally hopeless.
Right, yeah, that's kind of my point. So,
Yeah.
if you want to avoid a collective suicide here, please pick us up somehow.
Yeah.
Do you see anything at all?
Yeah, so, it's hopeless from the American perspective because basically everybody inside the Beltway of Washington benefits from the system as it is right now. Mm-hmm. And they are also the only political power we've got, people inside the Beltway of Washington. So this is a political change, but we've kind of lost the political capacity to act, except through those professional politicians. It's a lot like, when I was dealing with issues around intellectual property, the thing that struck me was the way the internet was reviving what I called read-write culture. It took us from a couch potato culture where we sat there and consumed read-only culture, consumed what other people were giving us, and encouraged and revived the sense of people creating and sharing their creativity. That's the kind of change we need with politics, because politics in America, even today, is still very passive, like sit on your couch, shut up, listen to the television commercials, and vote the way you're told. And a tiny fraction of America votes, the rest of America just sits home. But we've got to find a way to revive that, an citizen-engaged politics, and that is an extremely hard thing to imagine doing. And so that's the sense in which it feels hopeless.
So tell us a little bit more about what you mean. You say the system is broken. How so broken?
Well, it's hard to see because it's been a slow progress to where we are right now. But as Hemingway writes in, how did we go bankrupt slowly at first and then very quickly? And so that's what happened with us. And what's happened is America, starting in the 1990s, radically changed the way candidates for Congress raised the funds they needed to run for Congress. So, initially Congress became incredibly competitive, and the leaders basically sent the members out to raise the money to fight the campaigns to win control of Congress. Till we get to the point where we are right now, where members spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back into power. So, I don't know if you remember the image of a Skinner box, which is the device where you put a rat or a pigeon in, and the rat or the pigeon, after a while, learns what order of buttons it needs to peck in order to get the food it needs to get. That is the life of a congressman. The rat, or let's say pigeon, in the Skinner box. You've got a government right now that cannot address any single issue, even after we had the tragedy in Sandy Hook with the children being murdered by this gun craziness. Even then, 90% of Americans were supporting the most timid kind of background check legislation. 90% of Americans expressed support for that, and it could not get through the United States Senate because of the extraordinary power of the gun lobby inside of Washington. So this becomes the fundamental thing we have to fix if we're going to fix anything.
Where would you put yourself on the political scale today? You call yourself liberal?
Yeah, which in America means on the left. Not to say that we have much of a left in America, but that means on the left.
Left by American standards.
In American standards.
Yeah,
right.
that's our far right. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
I think it's important to distinguish two very distinct conceptions of corruption. There's the more traditional conception of corruption, which is bribery or violating the rules, quid pro quo, deviation from what the law requires. I don't think in that sense the United States Congress is corrupt at all. I think it's one of the cleanest institutions in that sense.
We're talking money in an envelope kind of corruption.
Or even corruption to benefit them personally. Right? It's nothing to do with the problem. I'm happy to stipulate there's none of that, right? But there's a very different sense of corruption, which is the way in which it's developed, where these people are so dependent upon these interests for their very existence inside the system of government that those interests have the power to bend them in the way that they get dependent.
Tend to have a high moral standard coming from Sweden. We tend to say that we're not corrupt here. We don't do that. Really?
No.
No?
We have lots of corruption here, but it's much more subtle. I mean, I don't think we have people getting bags of money, but you have certain jobs which are reserved for for politicians. You have the EU Parliament, which is one huge place of corruption where people get the sort of sinecures, and you also have a more creeping form of corruption now, which is maybe not even corruption, but you see more and more politicians going from being a politician to become a lobbyist for some kind of organization, work for a PR agency. I don't think that might be bad enough. Maybe you should have a quarantine between those two careers. But I think that they subtly begin to gear their politics to their future career. So the fact that they hope for a job perhaps in the EU Parliament or at a big lobbying firm makes them make decisions which they wouldn't otherwise have done.
There are some other areas where I think Sweden has a large potential problem, which, I mean, actually has to do with campaign finance. And this might sound odd from an American perspective, but campaign finance in Sweden is totally unregulated. We have no laws about it. And you said yourself that the kind of corruption you're talking about is legal, and it's actually regulated the way it works. But in Sweden, the more we get what in Swedish is typically called personval, that is, the vote among candidates within one political party, because that's very much, I think, the source of the American problem. The more we get that, the more potential there is for money to influence the vote, and that could actually make Sweden also vulnerable for those forms of corruption that Lawrence is talking about.
Modern conception of corruption is very individualistic. It's about an individual violating a rule. But a traditional conception of corruption predicated of institutions or bodies or societies as a whole. And in this sense, the United States Congress is precisely corrupt because the intended dependence that Congress was to have, as the Federalist said, Federalist 52, Madison said, Congress was to be dependent upon the people alone, has been corrupted because now they are also dependent upon this tiny group of funders. And the tiny group of funders is not the people. So in this very traditional sense of the term corruption, the institution has been corrupted. And I agree with you, we can't call everything we don't like corruption, but we have to call this corruption, because it is plainly corruption.
But the risk of doing that is that we underestimate the I would say, miraculous change that our parts of the world, and I include your country and my country, has undergone in a historical perspective, which is about getting rid of the illegal forms of corruption that you mentioned yourself, such as bribery and.
So we have a good history of cleaning, which means that we could.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's very few countries in the world that has actually undergone that, and I think it's a source of most of the things that we value in our society. Actually, a more important source than democracy.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And so if we sort of start calling the other thing corruption, we might. Forget about this huge
but they
transformation.
don't have to be corrupt in that way anymore, because they can look forward to a profitable career as a lobbyist or as an EU parliamentarian. They don't have to do anything illegal, because the legal system is geared for the politicians to become. They don't have to be illegal. So it's, in a way, it's even worse when they can be corrupt within the legal system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we made a few remarks on what corruption can be.
I mean, the problem with dark envelopes or envelopes changing hands in the night, that's a rather simple problem which can be solved. This is more insidious problems which we're talking about are much more difficult to eradicate.
Yeah, I just want to add, but it's not in every part of the world a simple problem to solve. So I agree it's a very difficult problem, and it's incredibly interesting to look at, for example, how Britain solved this problem. But I do think that if you look in the relatively narrow historical perspective, let's say in the last 100 years of American history, the harm done by that more traditional type of corruption, in my view, is small compared to the harm done by this more modern conception of corruption, right? Because, it is this corruption that gave us the financial crisis in 2008. Just take that alone. The harm that was done by that financial crisis, which we have not even begun to address the fundamental causes of that.
You were way more hands-on than any of us here. You've actually been out there on the street. First of all, what makes you think that you actually can accomplish something against this massive overpower? What gives you that spirit?
The companies have all the money, they have all the access to having opinions. I think as an individual who are not part of a rich elite, who don't have a voice, I think civil disobedience or going to the street it create an empowerment, and somehow it make it possible for you to make your voice heard. So I think it is a tool. I don't think it's the only tool, and it's not always effective, but I think it's something to do. It's a little step on the way.
We've talked about how other people are corrupt. We've talked about what mistakes other people make. I'm going to ask you, all of you, to name your price, to name the occasion or the circumstance where you yourself would become corrupt. I'm assuming that most people who are not corrupt out of pure evil in their souls, but because of some sort of circumstance. Carl.
You just want to ask us about our financial situations, that is. Because I remember once hearing Nelson Rockefeller when I was a student in America, and he sort of not praised himself, but he said, I'm so rich that I can't be corrupt. And it's something to it. You can't buy him. You can buy other people, of course. But, of course, I would probably vote for Sverigedemokraterna if they gave me 10 million crowns, and even for Miljöpartiet if they gave me 12.
So there's the money. And then you could use the money to influence policy the other way.
Yeah.
So you can even, and then you would justify it.
I will negotiate when the lights are out.
But this seriously though, this is interesting because what you're saying is, here's my price, but I would use the money to do something good with it. So you're negotiating with your moral standards right away.
What would be my price? When would I, take a bribe in order to give a student a higher grade or something like that? Well, I think that price is really, really high because I don't really see sort of what I could, how I could continue doing what I do.
I guess it wouldn't be a corruption of my values because I guess I would sell out the minute that I calculated that by selling out I could probably gain more in some other end. Like by selling out on my own values, I could maybe meet some of my other political gains.
Okay, so a straight cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, I guess that would be it.
The question is for what or for whom? So for my kids, sure. Right? If there was a position like I knew the only way to save them or the only way to help them in a fundamental way was to compromise myself in a fundamental way, of course. We do that all the time. People go to war in that, that's the ultimate corruption of your life, like the destruction of your life.
So we've concluded that we're all for sale. What a cheerful ending point. But friends, it's time for us to close the webcast. Thank you so much for showing. Thank you for participating the way you did. Thank you, those of you who have been watching on Sydsvenskan.se tonight. You can change your policy. You can get here the next time. You're going to have a lot more fun because we get to after party and you don't. But thanks for watching tonight anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm hand for this fantastic panel.